The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening and welcome to another installation of the culture of music and film. Yes, for those that joined us a little earlier, that was a skit we just performed for you. Mm-hmm. This beside me was really my handler, and I was coming on as the dummy tonight, but he just pulled the hands out, so now I got to speak for myself. Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen. We have a great show for you tonight. I have as my co-host tonight the lady who founded Straight Talk. We've heard her talk about what she does out there. She's been at it for 29 years and counting, coming from the orange groves, the cactus groves, and the oil fields of San Bernardino. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Phyllis McNeil, thanks a lot for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me again.
You had a long weekend, right?
Yes.
That's correct. You did a lot out here, didn't you?
Yes. I enjoyed myself.
And now you're ready to go home, huh?
Yes.
But not before we get to profile this young man. We got a great guest tonight.
We sure do.
And this young man, I met this young man when he came in and talked to us about a project he had. And it was well received. And then they've come to find out that this doctor also has a museum. So that means when you get to put a museum together, that means you have a passion for what you do and you believe in it. Mm-hmm. And it deals with gospel music and its roots and origin thereof at the USC Foundational, or the campus, what we would call it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the one and only Dr. Daniel Walker.
Hey, what's up?
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Yes. You too. So, Doc, we talked to you yesterday, and you didn't sound like this. You had your voice all the way going yesterday.
Yeah, it still got some ways to go before it sleeps, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, because you do a lot of talking and you do a lot of, advocacy also as far as instructional.
Yes.
And a lot of seminars. So I can imagine, man, you said you were on there and you made it through. The voice said, okay, I'm finished.
The voice said it was through. I was literally at St. Mark's United Methodist Church.
Right.
And the sermon, the message ended. And when it ended, I just ended.
Right.
That was it. The voice was gone. But I'm going to try to work it through today.
Right. Now, if you can preempt it, we have a project that you worked on.
Yes.
And I saw the project, and I mean, it's been such a great, moving piece. We saw it at a red carpet.
Yes.
Not too long ago at the theater, the Magic Theater. And I was moved by what I saw. What work was put into it, the historical aspect of it, and what it does to become, look into the past and still be relevant for today, with lessons learned. So we're going to come back and talk about lessons learned, but I want you to preempt this to let us know basically what we're going to be seeing over the next few minutes as we enjoy this project.
So this is a feature-length documentary called How Sweet the Sound that really tries to look at the time period between the Watts riots and the recording of Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace album. Mm-hmm. And the premise of the film is basically that there was a revolution in gospel music led by James Cleveland and a similar revolution in black church activism that ends up leading to both the recording of Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace album, which is the largest selling gospel album ever,
yes,
and the election of Tom Bradley as LA's first black mayor. So
correct,
showing how these communities come together to make these both two monumental things, I'd say not just in U.S. history, but in world history.
Got you. Man, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to see it. Let's go take a peek at it right now. How sweet
the sound.
That sound.
We have indeed.
In Jesus.
music was a way of expressing our struggle, our pain, but at the same time, our hope and expectation for better days. Because, sometimes through tears, there's yet joy.
So the gospel music coming out of Los Angeles in the 1960s and 70s was very much reflective not only of its time, but its space. It's LA. It's the West. In 1973, Tom Bradley was elected the first African-American mayor of Los Angeles. A year before that, Aretha Franklin recorded the highest-selling album in the history of gospel music, Amazing Grace. Both of those milestones were tied to a revolution in gospel music.
But what makes gospel music and its expression in the city of Los Angeles connecting to the black community of the city of Los Angeles is the hope that represents the terminus of the second migration, the complexity, the nuance, the disappointment, the joy, the spirit, the soundscape, the layers of it, its bombacity, its quietness, its rhythms, its tones, speak to, reflect, and amplify what the black community of the 60s and 70s feels both about itself, but also what it says to the larger Los Angeles community about who we are.
Many of the blacks and other minorities came to Los Angeles for jobs, to be Pullman porters or work in white homes or do various jobs where they were getting paid more and it was a better opportunity here in California.
For many of them, it was an opportunity to redo themselves. It was the promised land in terms of it was beautiful. It seemed like a new place because it was still building itself up.
And I think the other thing about Los Angeles is that it was not as much wrapped up in tradition, and everything was new.
And all of a sudden, they begin to have a critical mass of these African Americans. And because of restricted covenants, which denied the rights for African Americans to purchase homes, in about 90% of Los Angeles, they were all situated in this area, that we end up calling South Central. This area straight down Central Avenue, Avalon, Main, Broadway, where they had enough people to have a restaurant. They had enough people to have a cleaners. They had enough people to have and support small business. They had enough people to support churches. And they didn't just mean 1 or 2 or 3, but hundreds of churches, big and small, because so many people had come. And these churches, within about 3 miles of each other and within blocks of all these other churches, become generators of the sound. They would do 2, 3, 4 services a day because everybody wanted to hear this new, hip style of music.
I always look at gospel during the 40s as sort of a very critical period. As more people became interested in it, more churches became established, and churches and leaders had to find a way to satisfy the needs of all of these people.
In that little wooden church on the hill.
Victory Baptist was founded 75 years ago, and the founding pastor was Dr. Arthur Atlas Peters from Slidell, Louisiana. Reverend Peters knew a lot of the people from his hometown. As people were coming here to California, they needed a place to feel at home and make a connection. They would come into a church, and if the music sounded really good, then they would come back because music had a tremendous influence and appeal. And Pastor Peters understood that and capitalized on that.
We began to see the type of community change drastically. These were people who had come from rural communities, and they liked the spirituals, the old-time spirituals. But by the same token, they'd come to Los Angeles. They'd come to the city. And so they needed to have a different kind of music to demonstrate that they were living in the city. This is also the time when gospel is becoming more and more prominent within the Black community. And so whenever you had any kind of civil rights event or activity or any kind of campaign, you're just going to have gospel there because it was the same message. The two were linked together.
I come here to urge every person under the sound of my voice to go to the polls on the 3rd of November and vote your conviction.
So here in Los Angeles, it sort of was linked together through someone like Arthur Atlas Peters.
So Peters becomes the leader of Martin Luther King's SCLC on the West Coast and begins to position Victory Baptist Church as a political force.
Reverend Peters also had a unique relationship with the significant political individuals in Los Angeles.
The fact that he was sort of this spokesperson not only for community issues but also for gospel, and the fact that his church by the 50s and 60s had become a major center for gospel. Again, it was all sort of linked together.
As jazz bands and blues singers developed the worldly side of music, in the Negro church, a spiritual aspect of this new form was also developing, just as dynamic and forceful in stimulating our musical tradition.
First of all, this is my father, Brother Joe May. That's the first king of gospel. He had his hit was Search Me, Lord. And when that became a hit, he was able to give up his 9 to 5 and go on the road, so to speak.
Oh, search me, Lord. Please search me,
I was about 4 years old when I was singing gospel music. He would send for me on weekends so that I could sing with him. You know, we were on the road. So I got to meet all of the gospel greats as I grew up. Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers. Lou Rawls was with the Pilgrim Travelers. I met Aretha with her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin. Mavis Staples with the Staples Singers. And Reverend James Cleveland with Albertina Walker and her Caravans. And he was soloist as well as one of the pianists. And he wrote songs for them, and so he was also recording himself.
James Cleveland. Thank you, and welcome to TV Gospel Time.
In the 1960s, LA is experiencing all kinds of new phenomena, and one of them comes on behalf of one of its most famous incoming migrants, and that is this guy named James Cleveland. James Cleveland is called the Prince of Gospel. He had studied under none other than Thomas Dorsey in Chicago. He had played with many of the early gospel greats, and he had been already writing and arranging. He had played for Aretha Franklin's dad. He was the minister of music at their church in Detroit, Michigan. And he had already a recognized persona.
And I remember so well
that I said I wasn't going to tell nobody, but I couldn't keep it to myself. Said I wasn't going to tell nobody, but
As Los Angeles gained more recognition as the center for gospel music, perhaps those people who were living in Chicago felt as if they needed to go where the action is.
In the early 1960s, I invited Reverend Cleveland to come to Los Angeles.
This was uncharted territory, and I guarantee you he looked at it and said, all these voices, all these people, all these churches, and nobody's recording them and putting them on a national stage? Oh, I'm doing this.
And James Cleveland was in Detroit talking about, he was just kind of like stagnant or whatever. I said, oh, this is the place for you to come. I said, I've got a job for you. Come on out here.
He wanted to do something new. Most people associate him with Chicago, but it was only Los Angeles that allowed him to become great.
What he brought to Los Angeles was a bigger-than-life persona that people rallied to.
L.A. was an attraction. L.A. is Hollywood. Everybody wants to come here and leave the Midwest and try to make their star happen. So if I really want to make it, and especially if I want the music to go beyond my four walls and then maybe even cross into something else, L.A. is the place I want to be.
So now we're going to do a song called I'm Going Through, which is a song that Reverend W.T. Sneed used to do every Sunday night just before he did his sermon.
One of the best ways for people to begin to share this new music was through these radio broadcasts. So as African Americans begin to move into Los Angeles, you can imagine radio stations begin to change their format to cater to this new population. They dedicate Sundays to gospel music.
They called it a church radio broadcast. And so each church that was on would have their time slot. So our time was from 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. I felt like I had 2,000 music students each week. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, I have musicians coming to me that I never saw who told me how influential I was because they were able to hear the broadcast every Sunday night and try to figure out what it was that I was doing. During that time, there was only a few channels on TV that were even available. There was no cable. So the media was radio. They would gather around the radio and listen. So people began to hear those songs and how the musicians played them. A lot of the music changed in LA according to what they were hearing on the radio. So when James came here, he started to form this fellowship with the musicians. After they would have their church service and their broadcast, they would go out late night and eat and talk about what had happened in gospel music and who had done what. So they formed this bond where everyone was kind of accepting him as the leader of this new movement.
The fact that people began to invest in radio programs and TV programs gave them much more exposure. All of that went a long way in making gospel much more respected.
A number of these radio stations, because of their reach, it means that people outside of South Central get to listen to a Black South Central experience, which may be a religious experience you want to hear, but it also may be that it intunes you or makes you empathetic to a social and political reality that the pastor may be talking about.
They said we'll go up with you, we want to boast about you. And if you're going down, we'll help push you down. But I want to tell you, wherever you may be, just keep it going. If you strike a fall on roads, just keep it going.
Church back then was the only place where blacks had to congregate together. You got to see you dealing with oppression. That's getting rid of all that build-up in us. And music was a part of it. The congregation I had, we started in a house on a corner right down there. I'll ask about it now. In that one-bedroom house, you could count the stars. Back then, couldn't borrow no money. No bank would loan any money to us. They said, well, you can't do nothing out there in Compton. There's nobody out there. I said, I'm going to leave it up to God. God wants me to build him a building, a church.
Pastors, and particularly pastors in the African-American community, are going to be incredibly important in the early 1960s for electoral office.
When they started letting us vote, I became active. So I met Tom Brandon when he was a policeman and all, and I supported him.
Tom Bradley represents the pre-World War II narrative of those who are going to arrive into the city.
He resembles what so many of these people were aspiring to be. He was their story. He comes from Calvert, Texas, starts off his life as a sharecropper, then comes to L.A.
Well, he's able to leverage his athletic ability to generate a scholarship to the University of California, Los Angeles. He's one of 55 blacks on the campus at that time in the early 1930s.
And then, for 20 years almost, he's a police officer in the LAPD when there weren't many black people in the LAPD.
He then is going to pursue the possibility of elected office. He won't be the first. Gil Lindsay is going to be appointed to be the first African-American in the LA City Council, but he will join Lindsay on the City Council along with Billy Mills, and by 1963, the three of them will serve in the City Council, 3 of 15.
So these pastors were understanding that they had infinitely more to do and give to their congregations than just the scriptures on Sunday. And they begin to be a force, not a little force, but they are power brokers in the city.
I would put on rallies in the community, and the community would come. I didn't give up, pushing on.
All these people that talk about Watts, they say how dirty it is, how filthy it is, how much they want to leave. All my friends don't want to live here. Hate to say that they live in Watts. I think that's silly. They do live in Watts. Sure, everybody wants to get out. I don't. I think I want to stay here. But I don't want to live like I'm living right now.
I think for most Americans, there's no understanding of Jim Crow. And there's a silence within that particular generation of African Americans you come to Los Angeles and you want to forget the burning crosses. You want to leave behind the memory of the uncle who was hung from a tree. You want to leave behind the humiliation of waiting at the store and never being served. Violence was normal. Humiliation was normal.
you've got African Americans electing people to the city council. You've got them with the county supervisor who has their ear. You've got them with people in the assembly. You've got these rallies that are going on where they're saying, in essence, I am somebody, right? You've got the passage of the Civil Rights Act. I have rights that have been confirmed by the Congress and by the Supreme Court. I have rights. Political violence doesn't occur when people are just being oppressed. Actually, people can live for centuries being oppressed. It happens all over the world. When you have rising expectations, and rising expectations are met with a swift and sound defeat, that's when political violence happens.
If you're not going to hear me by using the normal mechanisms of elected officials, of city listening, of deliverable service, then we need to find other mechanisms by which that you're going to hear us.
In Los Angeles, California, it just seemed to be more opportunity here to, reach your dreams, a better life. Took them a little time to find out that it was just a horse of different color.
The sky is all shadowed with blackness. Oh, yes,
this area is being closed. Please go in your home.
No hand is nigh. Wake up, Jesus.
Gospel music as a genre was birthed by the challenging experience of black folk in America.
Most of music in church stems from the fact that we sung our way through history from one chaotic time and getting through it to another chaotic time and getting through that. So the music has always amplified where we are.
Master, the tempest is raging. Oh, the billows.
I believe God chose Reverend James Cleveland, for what he did and the effect that he had on gospel music, helping to bring the city of Los Angeles together. When he touched a song, it took on a new life just because of what he brought to it, the passion that he put into it, the conviction that he had for delivering that song. It gave it something just new, and it was gold.
The Christian kept on asking him, where is your faith?
One thing that's funny about James Cleveland, many people talk about that he wasn't the greatest piano player. You know what I mean? His voice is not the greatest voice. He's not the greatest of a lot of things. But when you put them all together, the whole is greater than the parts.
Christian said, all my bills are way past due.
Working with James Cleveland was so unique in that he had a gift for interpretation. His voice wasn't melodious, but he could sell a song. And he would make a song live, I don't care what it was.
Praise God in his sanctuary.
Gospel music used to just be on a piano, and people would clap and they would pat their feet. As time went on and James decided that he wanted to add instrumentation, basically because James was a recording artist with Savoy. In the studio, they would have access to a drummer to keep the beat right. They'd have an organ in there. They'd have a bass player. They had access to these other instruments. So James decided to bring that into the church.
Bass player, just praise him for 1 minute there. That's enough. And that's a lead guitar right there. Wonder, can I get you to praise him just 1 minute there? Okay.
One of his chief innovations was to mic the audience.
This here.
When people record, many times they want this clean sound, right? They don't want anything else out there because it'll mess up the sound. He understood that what he was capturing was the church experience, the lived experience in the church. So when you're listening to the recordings of a James Cleveland song, you hear a choir, but then you also hear shrieks in the background. You hear a woman wailing. You hear people screaming. You hear all kinds of other things. And you hear him interacting with the crowd. You see the improvisation happening because he understood that the real music experience was the church experience.
They can't help it. The Bible said, when you get home, get your Bible and dust it off.
Reverend James Cleveland and his Southern California Community Choir. Give them a big hand as they come at this time. Come on.
For most people, their image of gospel music is this huge choir, right? But in reality, in terms of recorded music and music industry, it was not the sound until really the 1960s and early 70s. When people bought recorded gospel music, they didn't buy big choir recorded gospel music. They bought quartets, they bought soloists.
We've always had choirs in churches and things like that, but not as a special event. You know, choirs sang for the morning worships and things like that, but they were not recording until Reverend Cleveland started to record.
Once you heard what he was doing with choirs, you never forgot it. You never wanted to go back to what you were doing before.
He put voices together, and 50, 60, 70 plus voices. It would just work. It would blend, and yet the voices were distinct.
This new appreciation for all these voices and all this coming through your airwaves was because of James Cleveland. After a very short period of time serving as a minister of music for other churches, James Cleveland establishes his own church, Cornerstone Baptist Church on Slauson and Western. And the church was a place of musical innovation. You can imagine that. The church was a place of healing spiritually, of uplift spiritually. But it was known as a place where everybody could be themselves, where they could be comfortable. No matter what their race was, they could come to Cornerstone. No matter what their sexual preference was, they could come to Cornerstone. No matter what their past musical history was, they could come to Cornerstone. And when he then creates the Southern California Community Choir, he took that same ethos with him. And so now, even though you go to a different church, but you really want to sing with James Cleveland, right? You've got the Southern California Community Choir, so you could be a member of any of these churches, and you could still be in there with James Cleveland.
James Cleveland probably deserves the recognition for being the groundwork for real transition. And I really think that's the biggest influence for who we are today.
This is James Cleveland and the Southern California Community Choir, and that's the choir here in Los Angeles. The title hit on there is Give Me a Clean Heart, and this particular song was very popular. It was sung in churches all across the country, and the song was written by one of the most prolific, and I mean this, one of the greatest writers of all times. And that's Margaret Pleasant Duro. Her music is awesome.
And I'm not asking for high men to know my name. Please, Lord, give me a clean heart so that
rank and file member of an African American church prior to the advent of these big community choirs, you were isolated to the church that you were a member of. With the creation of these community choirs, you end up having this beautiful cross-pollination going on, where members of one church were also members of these community choirs. That has a musical consequence that turns out to be this great music, but it also has a social and political consequence because they're sharing information with each other.
A Los Angeles councilman, Thomas Bradley, who was a Negro, finished first in yesterday's election for mayor, but he did not receive a majority, so he will compete in a runoff with the number 2 candidate, a man who is now the mayor, Sam Yorty.
After the Watts insurrection of 1965, Bradley is very well aware that L.A. police is used in many ways as an occupying army, and he's trying to leverage the possibility of the city council to try to at least corral some of the more egregious components of the Los Angeles Police Department. He gets pushback, and it's clear to him that if I stay as simply one of 15 in the city council, I will be able to make incremental shifts. But if I really want to make the sort of wholesale shifts, I think that are important in not just simply in the police department, but in all the services that the city provides. The best possible location to do that in many ways is going to be to become the mayor for the city.
Bradley made a very racist appeal in the Negro area that they should vote for him because he's black, and that appears to have worked to a certain extent. Then he also got the left-wing Democrats, so he put together sort of a block here, and I would say that about all the votes he's going to get, he will get in the primary.
Yorty will run, in many ways, a demonization campaign. He'll say that the supporters of Tom Bradley in 1969 are the Black Panther Party, they're violent toughs, that if you elect Tom Bradley city office, there's going to be a takeover by the violent elements of the community. And he's able to leverage that narrative to defeat Bradley in 1969.
The mayor has
has had a pattern of running a smear campaign rather than dealing with the issues. He's done this in the past, and his statements last night and early this morning clearly indicate that that's the attack he will take again.
And what's the best attack against a campaign like this?
I propose to ignore it. I believe that we ought to run a high-level campaign for the people of this city where we deal with the issues. We have enormous problems facing us, and to talk about gutter politics at a time like this, I think is inappropriate.
To his credit, he's defeated on Tuesday. He is in a church in West Hills on Sunday in 1969 because he's already beginning his 1973 campaign. They could feel him, they could see him, they could interact with him. He is going to reach out to the black church and move through First AME, Second Baptist, People's Independent Church, and ask their pastors to rally their congregants to show up. But in the black community, the two things that had to occur were voter registration and voter turnout. And in many ways, particularly the 1973 campaign, those are the two things that the black church did at its core: registering its congregants and getting those congregants out to be able to vote. So they serve a critical role in that process.
This music that these people are listening to in these churches is reflective of the experiences that they're having in the streets. There's a great song called Climbing Higher Mountains, and it goes, I'm climbing higher mountains trying to get home. I'm on the rough side of the mountain trying to get home. Those types of songs are those type of movement songs that say progression. And I think for many of these African Americans migrating into Los Angeles at this time, getting this thing from these churches that are pushing them in that direction, it is reflective of what you see when you see Tom Bradley get elected in 1973 as the first African American mayor of Los Angeles, California.
And I think all those things are layered and nuanced in the expression of black gospel music, but particularly in Los Angeles.
For the recording of Amazing Grace with Aretha Franklin, she came to Los Angeles and was backgrounded by the Southern California Community Choir and Reverend Cleveland. And of course, this is Aretha when she was doing the Amazing Grace album. And coming down for the beginning of the album, she would march in.
When they begin to start talking about recording this album, and in essence, bringing her back home, bringing her back to church, all the things, it became a perfect storm. Aretha's doing her thing. She's making music, but she knows her soul is in the church. And now James Cleveland says, come to LA, let's do it. We'll have the right musicians for you. We'll have everything you need. And the fact that James Cleveland had been making these great records that she loved. And she's thinking, yeah, we can do this.
And we rehearsed at the Cornerstone Institutional Baptist Church, which was then in a storefront. A very small space, about 150 people strong. And that's when we got the choir together. We rehearsed at that place for about 2 weeks to get everything together. And then we were ready to move to the live recording session.
It's recorded over 2 days. For the people who came on the recording dates, who were members of New Temple, it was like royalty.
I was in the alto section of the choir during that time. I sang with the choir. It was a wonderful recording session. Very upbeat. And of course, we didn't really make a major announcement at all. But word of mouth got out, and of course the place was packed.
coolest thing, if you ever watch the performance, is that there's an interaction between the two of them, where even though she's the queen of soul, she gives in to the prince of gospel, that he's still directing her. Amazing Grace is the biggest selling gospel record of all time, and it's also Aretha Franklin's biggest selling hit. This album is bigger than any other album she ever had. That album doesn't happen without this Los Angeles connection. So think about this. You just left the Deep South. In the Deep South, you had to walk around with signs on you that said, "I am a man," to try to get somebody to respect who you were just as a citizen and as a person. You were fleeing lynchings that were still happening in the United States ad nauseum. And you decide to come to this place called Los Angeles, this new place on the western frontier. And you were segregated and pushed into this small community called South Central Los Angeles. One of the centers of African-American social, political, and religious activity is the church. When you start to become politically active, and you have ups and downs that happen, but in 1973, one of you becomes the mayor. What do you think they felt? Joy. You could be like Tom Bradley. Look, we could do it. Look, we can be politically engaged. Yes, parties in the streets. We did it. We're only 17% of the population, and we did it.
I was 7, and I can remember sort of holding the newspaper and looking at the newspaper and realizing that something was going to change. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the next day, maybe not the next week, but something was going to change.
He resembles what so many of these people were aspiring to be. He was their story. In terms of the African Americans, he was exactly their story.
We just went crazy. Because the gate has been open for us to come in. I even saw the unseen generation coming. I saw change.
People saw it as a joyous day. They saw it as unbelievable. The best way I can explain it is Barack Obama in 2008. And you're sitting there thinking it's never going to happen, and it happened. And so for them, it was a great day. It was one of those days of Jubilee.
Hope is an incredibly misused, overused, misaligned term. It goes beyond hope. It had been 4 years of concerted and concentrated effort, hard work, voter registration campaigns, door knocking, lawn signs, get out the vote campaign. And we were able to get this former Negro city councilman in to become mayor. In the black community, there's just elation.
We don't get Tom Bradley winning the election in 1973 without the political organization of African-American preachers, ministers in that time period from 1960 leading up to 1973. You don't get Aretha Franklin singing Amazing Grace without James Cleveland coming to Los Angeles. Both of these milestones in the history of Los Angeles and the nation were connected to a renaissance in gospel music.
you guys enjoyed that. That was my eyes were filled. My heart was filled, man, with pride. It was a great day in America.
Yes.
For Black America. And then for those that were supporting us from other cultures to see that we overcame, would you say like 15%? Yet still just
17%, and you not only win once, and then twice, and then 3 times, and then 4 times. Yes, because they came together around what was right and what was good.
Then you become a legacy. Wow, it's beautiful. I want to give a shout out to a young lady we met earlier today. We had a chance, me and Sister Phyllis had a chance to go down to Doolin's.
Yes.
Had some good soul food, and we ran into this young lady who's a general manager, Renee Margari. And we want to give a shout out to Doolin's, man. And if you guys are looking for some great soul food, go down 4859 Crenshaw Boulevard and see the staff down there, man. They will hook you up. We looked at those places, we like, wow, they give us some food, huh?
Yeah, double for your money.
Yes, I love it. So shout out to you guys down there. Continue doing a lot of great things down there. We're going to continue to send people to you and look forward to a long relationship with you. Doctor, let's go back a minute. Now, not only did you have the vision, you also had to go out there and do the legwork, find the resources, and also you have one of the resources that's on one of the biggest campuses out here in California. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, literally, it's funny because like 20 years ago, I started really working on gospel. I had grown up in church. I did a lot of research. My first book was really about slavery and festivals in New Orleans and Savannah and stuff like that. And then it was like I started realizing that there weren't as many books written about gospel as there were about jazz and blues. Just real quick, there's maybe, and I'm serious about this, maybe 20 good books about gospel.
Wow.
There's over 400 books just about Miles Davis. You get where I'm coming from? So all this about gospel in one person, Miles Davis, So I wanted to place gospel as a scholar on the same level as the research, study, and appreciation of jazz and blues.
Gotcha.
Especially because it's the only one that is still being created and experienced and recreated in Black communities. Kids don't go out and play jazz every day. No. Kids don't go out and play the blues. But every Sunday and on Saturday and on Thursday night choir rehearsal, you're going to hear some people playing, and the kids are going to be listening to live music with improvisation in a community setting. That's where they're going to get that. So I wanted to do that. So that was a part of creating first the Gospel and Music History Project. That was a national project about trying to make this happen. Then the archive at USC, and then the exhibit that we had at the California African American Museum.
Yes.
And then this piece and the future stuff that's going to come out, a full series about the history of gospel music, which hopefully will be coming out in about the next 18 months.
Right. And like I said, that you were talking about some of the vaults, so to speak.
Yes.
Through some of our, forgot what you called them, the Golden Girls or something like that had all these nooks and crannies of information.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's tied to this other thing I was doing was I'm one of the big researchers about Pentecostalism.
Okay.
And so same thing. Pentecostalism was birthed here in Los Angeles, the Azusa Street Revival. But same thing. There was not as much research done on the African American aspects of the Pentecostal movement, was as much in terms of archives. And so at USC, we got a grant at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture to try to study global Pentecostalism. And then I was in charge of the U.S. division, and I said, we need to concentrate on a group called the Church of God in Christ.
Right.
And out of the Church of God in Christ information, we end up finding these 7 different people around the United States who had archives of their own that they had created. A woman, Emma Clark in the Bay Area, Glenda Goodson in San Francisco. But these women who had literally put together their own archives, and then the two came together.
Wow.
Because you can't do gospel without the Church of God in Christ.
No, you cannot.
You can't.
No, you cannot.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
So they came together. That's how God just works sometimes, that it all just work together. And then it was like, now take it to the next level and put it not just on wax, but put it on the screen. So
exactly.
That's what we try to do.
Exactly. And you just wrapped it up really well. The cinematography, I mean, everything layered. And when you find something like this as layered as it is, but yet and still it's not so overwhelming that we're just sitting at the end of the day going, wow, that was a lot to take in. You wove a journey, and you were able to bring all these different components that made this journey substantial. And then you showed how it was relevant to what happened then. So let's step forward a little bit into getting ready to 2020 and tell us where's the relevancy today.
All things are possible.
Okay.
Don't get discouraged just because your numbers don't look the same.
Okay.
That what is right is what is right, and people will gravitate towards that which is good. And that you can overcome insurmountable odds. They had to be believing. There's no way.
Right.
But I take that back. They didn't believe there was no way. They believed there was a way.
Right.
And so whether it be today's current political situation, whatever you may think, feel, or whatever else, the ability to change it, there's a blueprint, and the other part is the magnificent impact of music.
Yes.
That we still have the ability to use music not only to make ourselves feel good, but also to politically engage,
right,
and to politically organize. So that's, to me, those are the lessons. If those people could do it, coming from Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, being pushed into Compton, South Central, and Watts,
exactly,
with less education than we have today, less resources than we have today, if they could do so much with so little, somebody.
Right.
What should we be able to do with what we have today?
Exactly. Yeah, the universal language that we have, even back in the day. Let's go back in the day when we were the kings and queens of our dominion, when the mode of communication were drums, and then the people over in the studios here. Then the drummer to this day still is the one that sets the pace.
Yes,
he's the bottom, and so they picked it up. And so they're continuing to do their thing. But like I said, when you stop and go back to innovation, the motivation, that's the tenacity, that's the stick-to-itness, that's our ancestors doing what they do and us stepping on their shoulders.
Say it.
Yeah. And how quickly do these young people forget that there's nothing new under the sun? But they'll be the first to tell you they invented something good in the lab. It's like, really? That's been around for a while. You just weren't aware of it. But a lot of it came out of the church.
Yeah, but I think also, you can jump in here too, in the work that you're doing in the Inland Empire and everything else, that the young people are bringing something to the table. They're bringing something great. And I think that they understand the capacity too. The Black Lives Movement, these young people are pushing policy. You see young people, it's always got to be a new way though, just like these gospel people. When they stepped in and James Cleveland was doing what he was doing, the older crowd was saying that ain't good.
Right. Exactly.
And Dorsey did his thing. There was a group that said that wasn't it.
Yes.
And when Hawkins did their thing, Oh Happy Day and Love Alive, and somebody said that. You know what Kirk Franklin did, right?
Yes.
So I think that they're always continuing to move the genre of music forward and continuing in everyone's own generation speaking truth to power.
And that's the key right there, speaking truth to power. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what it's all about. He says no matter what you're doing, there's always room for improvement, because you know what? The improvement can come from you every time you look at yourself in the mirror. Let's go around before we leave here, and let's tell them how they can reach you.
You can reach me at the Straight Talk line, 951-272-5747, or you can view my website, www.straight, spell the word out straight, talk, heals, HEALS.org.
Straight Talk Heals.
Yes,
Straight Talk Heals. I like that.
Right. Yeah, I love it.
Yes.
Doctor?
I'm at drdanielwalker.com and then Dr. Daniel Walker on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
I love it. And like we tell you each and every week here on the cultures of music and film, we're always trying to open your mind to the possibilities of what can be by going to what was, what is, and then help you to find a way to figure out what can be. Dr. Walker, I appreciate you coming down, man, and taking the rest of your breath and giving it to us, man. Hopefully getting your voice back.
But it's still scratchy.
Yeah, but we'd like to, this is more than one part of this. We'd like to be able to bring you back, man. So, and then we're just going to take some time to just really we saw the film. And we really want to dig into this one here, because I see that there's a lot going on. And we want you to help us traverse this journey and open up the eyes of our young people, as well as those that have made the journey ahead of us a lot easier to follow.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been another great show on the cultures of film and television and radio. Right here, I'd like to thank Miss M. I'd like to thank Makita, who is doing her thing, getting ready to go on her little tour. And Thank you for the song that you opened and closed with, Dr. Walker. Yes,
One quick shout out to everyone at KCET. This film would not have happened. KCET is the executive producer along with myself and my producer, Jack Reno, and also the head of programming at KCET, who is Juan Davis. So I want to make sure, because this thing wouldn't have happened without that happening.
Met them, great people, great spirits, and they understand the movement too. God always puts his people in the right spot. So until next time, here we are at Culture of Music and Film saying, put God first, and everything else will follow. I guarantee it. Thank you.
Heaven must have known that this day would surely come along. Has to make